The voicemail came while I was stringing lights across the banister, snow falling steadily outside my window. "Sarah," my mother's voice said, clipped and careful. "About Christmas dinner this year, your father and I think it might be best if you sat this one out. Everyone's still adjusting to, well, your situation, and we'd rather avoid any awkwardness. Please understand." The message ended with the faint clink of her teacup, that same sound I grew up hearing every morning, calm and detached. I stood there, the garland slipping from my hand, watching the blinking red light on the phone like it might start bleeding. My 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was in the living room humming Silent Night while cutting paper snowflakes. My son, Noah, chased our cat under the half-decorated tree. I took a slow breath, pressed delete, and poured myself a glass of red wine. The reflection in the kitchen window showed a woman who'd just been erased from her own family's holiday picture. "Apparently, Mommy ruins Christmas now," I muttered, and for the first time all season, the silence actually felt warm. It wasn't as if I hadn't expected something like this. Ever since my divorce, my parents had treated me like a public relations disaster waiting to happen. To them, being a divorced woman in our family was worse than being a criminal. It meant failure, gossip, questions they didn't want to answer over cranberry sauce. My mother, Margaret Thompson, believed appearances were a religion. She polished our family image the way some people polish silver every year before the holidays. When she said, "We just want to keep things peaceful," what she really meant was, "Don't bring your shame into my dining room." I called her back anyway. "Mom," I said when she answered, "I got your message." "Oh, good. I'm glad you understand, sweetheart. It's not personal." It feels personal when you uninvite your own daughter from Christmas. "We're trying to protect you from uncomfortable questions. The Wilsons will be there, and you know how they gossip. It's just better this way." Better for who? For everyone? You and the children can make your own little tradition. Maybe go skiing. Something cheerful. She sounded like she was suggesting a spa treatment, not cutting her daughter out of the family holiday. When I hung up, I found Lily standing in the doorway, holding a paper star. "Grandma doesn't want us to come?" she asked. I crouched down and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "No, honey. Grandma just wants a different Christmas this year." "Did we do something bad?" I swallowed hard. "No, we're going to have our own Christmas. Just us. The best one ever." Noah, who'd been listening, grinned. "Can we still have hot cocoa and sing songs?" "Even better," I said, forcing a smile. "We'll have our own feast. Maybe even build a snowman taller than the tree." After they went back to their crafts, I sat at the table, staring at the box of ornaments I'd been avoiding opening. Each one was a memory. Tiny glass angels from my grandmother, the porcelain ballerina my mom gave me when I was 9, the baby's first Christmas snow globe from when Lily was born. I realized that for years, Christmas had been less about joy and more about performing, smiling for photos, pretending we were the perfect family. My ex-husband, David, would sit beside me at those dinners, all charm and cologne, while my parents beamed like hosts of a live broadcast. Nobody knew that behind closed doors, he was lying, cheating, slowly draining me of both love and savings. Now I was the scandal, the divorced daughter, the proof that Margaret Thompson's perfect family had cracks. I could almost hear her rehearsing excuses for the neighbors. "Sarah just needed time to herself this year. She's focusing on the children." Anything but the truth. I poured another glass of wine and scrolled through my phone, half out of habit, half searching for distraction. Photos of other families flooded my feed, matching pajamas, coordinated red sweaters, smiling husbands holding babies by fireplaces. For a moment, I felt that familiar sting of envy, then something else. defiance. Why did their approval still matter to me? Why did I still crave an invitation to a table where I was only welcome if I kept my pain invisible? The next morning, I woke up early. The house was quiet except for the sound of the heater humming against the cold. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, intending to look up recipes for Christmas cookies. Instead, I found myself clicking through listings for houses I couldn't possibly afford, or so I thought. Big stone homes tucked into snowy mountainsides, fireplaces the size of my old bedroom, chandeliers dripping with light. It was a dangerous kind of daydreaming. Then I saw it. A restored Victorian estate in Vale, wide verandas, 12-foot ceilings, a grand staircase, and in the listing photos, a massive Christmas tree glittering in gold. Available immediately, it said. For a full minute, I stared at the screen. The price was ridiculous, but the idea wasn't. I wasn't thinking about revenge yet. Not exactly. What I felt was something sharper, colder, a hunger to reclaim my story. If my family thought I was too broken, too divorced, too inconvenient for their perfect holiday image, maybe it was time to build one of my own. By evening, I'd printed the listing and pinned it to the fridge, right next to Lily's drawing of a snowman family. My kids came running in from the snow, cheeks pink, eyes bright. "Mommy, are we really having our own Christmas?" Lily asked. "We are," I said, "and it's going to be beautiful." "How beautiful?" Noah asked. I smiled. The kind of Christmas people talk about for years. When they went to bed, I sat by the window with a blanket, watching the snow fall heavier now, burying everything in silence. The neighborhood lights shimmered against the white, each house glowing like a postcard. Somewhere in Seattle, my family was probably sitting in their polished living room, discussing seating charts and color themes. My mother would be ironing the tablecloth, my father checking the wine cellar, my sister-in-law arranging poinsettias around the silver candlesticks. All perfect, all hollow. My phone buzzed on the counter, a new voicemail from my brother James. "Hey Sarah, Mom told me about dinner. Don't take it personally, okay? You know how she is about appearances." Then a pause. "Maybe next year? Next year." The phrase tasted bitter. I deleted that message too, then opened my laptop again, clicked on the Vale listing, and stared at the photographs until I could almost hear the echo of laughter in those wide, empty halls. A part of me whispered, "You can't afford this." Another voice, louder, said, "You can't afford to keep living like they get to decide your worth." I shut the laptop and looked toward the half-decorated tree. The lights blinked unevenly, one strand flickering out. I walked over, fixed the bulb, and whispered to the empty room, "If they want perfect, I'll show them perfect." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, relentless, clean. And for the first time in years, I felt something like peace, not the kind you beg for, but the kind you create yourself. The kind that starts with a quiet promise. This Christmas, no one would make me feel small again. Last Christmas, everything still looked perfect from the outside. The Thompson family's annual holiday dinner could have been a magazine spread. Red velvet ribbons on the staircase, polished crystal, matching sweaters. My mother floated around the dining room, giving orders in her soft, controlling tone, and my father poured wine as if nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. And there I was, standing in the kitchen, elbow deep in cookie dough, pretending not to notice my husband texting someone under the table. "Smile, Sarah," my mother said, straightening the bow on my dress before I carried out the pies. "You have everything a woman could want." I smiled for her camera because that was what I'd been trained to do. Smile, look grateful, keep the peace. Behind me, David laughed too loudly at something my brother said, his phone lighting up again with another message. I remember watching his reflection in the window, the way his fingers hovered too long before typing. The sound of Christmas carols faded, replaced by that cold, electric hum of suspicion. Even then, I think I knew. I just didn't want to admit it. I had built my life around that man, around the idea of us. If I had admitted the cracks, the whole thing would have shattered. And with it, the version of me my parents wanted to show the world. By March, the cracks weren't cracks anymore. They were chasms. David was always late coming home, smelling of cologne I didn't recognize, his shirt still warm from someone else's hands. He told me he had new patients, emergency surgeries, a growing practice. "It's good for the business," he said. "Be proud of me." I wanted to believe him, but the clinic schedule didn't match his stories. Appointments appeared under names I didn't know, repeated names, same times, same days. One night, I packed dinner and drove to his office. The parking lot was empty except for his car and one other, a shiny red convertible I'd never seen before. The front lights of the clinic were off, but I saw shadows moving inside. I pushed open the glass door quietly, my heels echoing in the silence. Through the half-closed blinds, I saw David standing too close to his dental assistant, his hand on the small of her back. They were laughing softly, and something about the intimacy in that laughter hit harder than any confession could have. I didn't burst in. I didn't scream. I walked out, sat in my car, and watched the snow start to fall. When I got home, he was already there, pretending to work on billing reports. "Where were you?" he asked without looking up. "I could ask you the same thing," I said. He sighed dramatically. "You're imagining things again, Sarah. You've been fragile lately. Since you stopped teaching, you've had too much time to think." That was his favorite trick, making me doubt myself. Gaslighting, though I didn't have a word for it back then. Every lie came wrapped in concern, every betrayal disguised as my overreaction. By the end of that night, I almost apologized for making him uncomfortable. Almost. A week later, the truth started leaking through in the most boring, bureaucratic way possible. An email from the bank. Account overdue. Immediate attention required. At first, I thought it was spam, but then I saw the balance. 0. Our joint savings, drained. When I confronted him, David's face twisted into annoyance, not guilt. "I moved the money temporarily," he said. "Investment purposes. You wouldn't understand the financial side of the business." "Then explain it to me," I said. "It's complicated," he muttered, grabbing his coat. "Don't worry about it." But I did worry. I dug through files, tax returns, business receipts. What I found didn't make sense. Rent payments to non-existent companies, equipment purchases for phantom offices, checks signed over to consultants I'd never met. He was hiding money, maybe hiding more than that. When I told my father, hoping for guidance, he just sighed and rubbed his temples. "Sarah, this isn't the time to make a scene. Marriage takes patience. You have children to think about." "Dad, he's lying to me. He's stealing from me." "You're angry, and that's understandable. But divorce?" He said the word like it was profanity. "That would hurt everyone's reputation." Reputation. That sacred word. In our house, the invisible God we all served. Reputation over truth. "That's the family motto, isn't it?" I said. He looked away. When I walked out of my parents' house that night, the air felt heavy and cold. I remember thinking that if I stopped moving, the weight of it all would crush me right there on their perfect front porch. The next morning, I packed 2 suitcases, grabbed the kids, and left. Lily was 5 then, still asking when Daddy would come home. Noah clutched his stuffed bear and said, "Are we going on vacation?" I told him yes, because the truth, "we're leaving forever," was too much for his small heart. We moved into a small apartment with beige walls and a heating unit that rattled. I thought maybe my mother would visit, bring soup, tell me she was proud of me for standing up for myself. Instead, she showed up 2 days later with a tray of casseroles and a lecture. "Men make mistakes," she said, glancing around my modest living room as if poverty were contagious. "Don't throw away your marriage over pride." "He lied to me," I said. "He took our money." She smoothed her gloves, avoiding my eyes. "Then forgive him quietly. People don't need to know the details." "People already do, Mom. You just care that they know." Her lips tightened. "You always were dramatic. Think of the children, Sarah. They need stability. Stability doesn't come from pretending." That was the last thing I said before she left. The door closed softly, but it sounded like a verdict. A week later, my brother Michael called. "I heard about you and David," he said, voice full of pity and something colder. "You need to be practical. You can't raise 2 kids alone." "Watch me," he chuckled, the same condescending laugh I remembered from childhood. "Mom and Dad are worried. You're making things harder than they need to be." Harder for who? For everyone? Families are supposed to stick together. I wanted to scream that they were the ones who'd untied the knot, that I was the only one holding the threads together. But what was the point? They didn't hear me then, and they weren't going to start now. By April, the divorce papers were drafted. David's lawyer sent a smug email filled with legal jargon and veiled threats. "Our client wishes to settle amicably," which I learned was code for "take what we offer and shut up." He offered me the car and a small monthly payment, barely enough to cover groceries. I stared at the numbers until my vision blurred, then closed the laptop, poured myself coffee, and whispered, "No." That night, after the kids fell asleep, I sat by the window in that little apartment, watching the lights from the street flicker through the blinds. I thought about how many years I'd spent keeping quiet so everyone else could be comfortable. I had mistaken silence for grace, endurance for love. My mother called it keeping the peace, but peace, I realized, shouldn't feel like suffocation. I picked up my phone and typed an email to a name I'd found earlier that day. Elizabeth Harper, a divorce attorney recommended by a friend from college. I didn't write a long message, just, "I'm ready to file, I need help." Before I could talk myself out of it, I hit send. I took off my wedding ring that night. It left a pale mark on my finger, a ghost of the woman I used to be. I set it on the table beside an untouched cup of tea and turned off the light. Through the window, the first snow of the season began to fall. Soft, quiet, relentless. I stood there for a moment, watching it cover the world in white, and for the first time in months, I felt something almost like calm. Not happiness, not yet, but the beginning of something else. A decision, a promise to myself that the next time I smiled, it wouldn't be for anyone's camera. It would be because I meant it. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a sound that felt final, like the heavy lid of a box being sealed. The sky above Seattle was steel gray, the kind that warned of snow. I stood on the steps, clutching a manila envelope full of papers. My divorce decree, my settlement documents, proof that 5 years of marriage could be reduced to a stack of signatures and embossed stamps. It was over, and yet I'd never felt more uncertain about what came next. The wind cut through my coat as I walked to the car I'd parked 3 blocks away because I couldn't afford the garage fee. Inside, the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and crayons. Noah had left his drawing on the back seat. A stick figure family, just the 3 of us now, smiling under a crooked sun. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and breathed in the silence. For the first time, there was no one to tell me what to do next. No safety net disguised as control. Just me, 2 kids, and a balance in my checking account that wouldn't last the month. That night, after I tucked the kids into bed, I logged into our old joint account and froze. It was locked. David had moved the remaining funds to a business escrow. The landlord's notice sat unopened on the counter. Rent overdue. I stared at the bills spread out like a losing hand in a card game and wondered how everything had collapsed so quickly. Lily padded into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Mommy, does this mean Daddy's not coming back?" she asked. I managed a smile I didn't feel. "No, honey. It means we get to make our own story now." The next few weeks were a blur of decline. I sold my engagement ring, then the SUV we'd bought for the family. I found a cheaper apartment in an aging building across town, the kind with thin walls and humming pipes. Our new place smelled of dust and detergent, but it was ours. Or at least it would be, until I ran out of savings. The first night there, the heater broke. I remember curling up on the couch with both kids, wrapping them in the same blanket, whispering stories about polar bears so they'd think the cold was an adventure. The next morning, I knocked on the superintendent's door, hoping for repairs, but no one answered. Instead, I met the woman from the apartment next to ours. She was in her early 60s, with a gray braid and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything but still found reasons to smile. "You must be the new tenant," she said, handing me a wrench. "Name's Ellen. You'll need this more than the landlord's number." I laughed for the first time in weeks. She helped me tighten a pipe under the sink, then stayed for coffee. She told me she used to be an art teacher before retiring, that she lost her husband 3 years ago, and her son barely spoke to her now. "Families are funny that way," she said, stirring sugar into her mug. "They disappear when you need them, then reappear when they need you." Something in her tone hit home. We talked for hours that day about everything, from favorite painters to the loneliness of starting over. Before she left, she placed her hand on mine. "You'll be fine, Sarah. You've still got that spark. Don't let them snuff it out." Over the next month, Ellen became my lifeline. She'd knock on my door with leftover soup or bring the kids' coloring books she found at the thrift store. Sometimes she'd just sit at my table, sipping tea, filling the silence with stories about the students she once taught. There was a steadiness in her presence that reminded me what kindness sounded like when it didn't come with conditions. Meanwhile, I started searching for work again. Teaching jobs were scarce mid-year, but the community center downtown needed someone to run weekend art classes for children. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover groceries, but the idea of picking up a brush again stirred something in me. I hadn't painted in years. David used to complain about the mess, the smell of turpentine, the useless hobby. I'd packed away my paints the way people bury dreams they can't afford to keep. The first day of class, I walked into a room filled with mismatched easels and bright-eyed kids clutching cheap paint sets. They called me Miss Sarah, and within minutes, the room buzzed with laughter and color. A little girl named Ava asked if she could paint the sky purple. "You can paint it any color you want," I told her. "It's your world." And as I said it, I realized I was talking to myself too. By the end of that first class, my hands were stained with blue and gold, my hair smelled like acrylic. And for the first time since the divorce, I didn't feel broken. I felt alive. Days turned into weeks. Between teaching and part-time online tutoring, I managed to pay the bills. Ellen helped me fix things around the apartment. The kids adjusted better than I dared to hope. Lily started leaving little notes on the fridge. "Mom, your smile looks good today." Noah asked if we could paint his room yellow because it feels happy. Slowly, the cracks in our lives filled with new color. One evening, Ellen invited me over for dinner. Her apartment was filled with paintings. Wild, messy, beautiful strokes of color. "You still paint?" I asked. "Every day," she said. You should too. It's how you survive the noise. She handed me an old sketchbook and a set of brushes she didn't use anymore. That night, after the kids fell asleep, I opened it and began to draw. At first, the lines trembled, uncertain, like I'd forgotten how to move my hand that way. But soon, the motion returned. I painted a tree covered in snow, its branches bending but not breaking. I didn't notice the tears on my cheeks until they mixed with the watercolor. The next morning, I hung the painting on our living room wall. Ellen came by, looked at it, and said softly, "That's not sadness, honey. That's strength." By spring, the community center offered me more hours. I started organizing weekend exhibits for the kids, small displays where parents could admire their children's art. I saw myself in those little faces, hopeful, messy, determined. Each time they cheered for one another, I felt a piece of the woman I used to be returning, stronger, sharper. It wasn't all easy. Some nights, loneliness crept in like a draft through the window. Bills still scared me. The absence of family still hurt. But I'd stopped waiting for rescue. I was learning that independence wasn't about being fearless. It was about standing up again, even when your knees were shaking. One Friday evening after class, I walked home through falling snow. The streetlights cast long, golden reflections on the pavement. I passed a store window filled with Christmas decorations, red ornaments, wreaths, and a tall white tree glowing in the display. For a second, I thought of my parents' house, the one I wasn't welcome in anymore, and then of Ellen's voice in my head. Family isn't always who you're born to. It's who shows up. When I got home, the kids were asleep on the couch, a half-built gingerbread house between them. I covered them with a blanket, sat beside them, and looked around the little apartment. It wasn't much, but it was ours, built from resilience and second chances. Ellen stopped by the next morning with cinnamon rolls and a grin. "You've got that glow again," she said, handing me coffee. "That's the look of a woman coming back to life." I laughed, touched my cheek, and realized she was right. For the first time, my reflection didn't look like someone's daughter or ex-wife. It looked like me. That night, as the snow fell quietly outside, I stood at the window, holding my mug, and thought about everything I'd lost. My home, my marriage, my family's approval. And yet, what filled the space they left wasn't emptiness. It was something steadier, something mine. Maybe losing everything wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of who I was always meant to be. The first time I met Elizabeth Harper, I almost turned around at her office door. The law firm was in a converted brick townhouse near downtown Seattle, all polished wood and the faint smell of coffee and toner. I stood there clutching my folder of documents like a student waiting outside the principal's office. Then a voice called out, firm but not unkind. "You must be Sarah Thompson." Elizabeth was in her early 50s, sharp gray bob, glasses perched low on her nose. Everything about her said competence, the neat stack of files, the small cactus on her desk that looked impossible to kill, the steady way she studied me. "You've been underestimated, haven't you?" she said before I could sit down. I blinked, unsure how to answer. "I suppose you could say that?" She smiled faintly. "I usually can tell. Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out." For the next hour, I talked until my throat ached. About David, the affair, the missing money, the frozen bank accounts, the way my family acted like silence was more valuable than truth. Elizabeth didn't interrupt. She took notes, occasionally asking a precise question, her pen tapping lightly against the pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "He's hiding assets," she said simply. "They always do." My hands tightened around the folder. "Can we prove it?" "Oh, I can prove anything," she said with a calm that made me believe her. but I'll need time and a forensic accountant. She slid a business card across the desk. We'll find every penny he tried to bury. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt a flicker of something close to safety. Someone was finally on my side. The investigation began quietly, almost clinically. Elizabeth's office became my second home. I'd sit across from her desk, surrounded by stacks of paper, while her team combed through years of David's financial records. There were spreadsheets, invoices, and receipts coded with abbreviations that might as well have been hieroglyphics. Elizabeth explained them all with surgical precision. "Here's where it gets interesting," she said one afternoon, pointing to a column of payments labeled equipment upgrades. "This vendor doesn't exist. The address is a mailbox at a UPS store." I stared at the printout. "So he's been funneling money?" "Looks that way. And here, consulting fees to someone named Brittany Summers." My stomach turned. His assistant. Elizabeth arched an eyebrow. "Well, she's certainly consulting him on something." I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. It felt wrong, laughing about any of it, but it also felt good. Elizabeth grinned, just a little. "Don't worry. Humor's how we stay sane in this line of work." Weeks passed. The more her team uncovered, the clearer the picture became. David wasn't just dishonest. He was creative. Shell companies, inflated expenses, false equipment purchases. Elizabeth's accountant traced every trail of money like a detective following footprints in fresh snow. "He's not just lying to you, Sarah," Elizabeth said one evening as she flipped through another report. "He's lying to the IRS. That's leverage." The word leverage hung in the air like a promise. 2 weeks later, David called. "Let's talk," he said, his voice too smooth. "No lawyers, just us." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet. We chose a coffee shop halfway between our apartments. Neutral ground, though nothing about that day felt neutral. He was already seated when I arrived, dressed in one of his expensive coats, his smile rehearsed. "You look good," he said, as if we were old friends catching up. "I didn't come here for compliments." He stirred his coffee slowly, eyes sharp behind the charm. "I think we both know this divorce doesn't need to get ugly. You don't want to drag it out, Sarah. It'll just make you look bitter." I watched him for a moment, then reached into my purse and pulled out a printed document Elizabeth had given me. It wasn't the real evidence, just a summary. I slid it across the table. "Then let's hope bitterness doesn't show up in the audit reports." His smile faltered. "What is this?" "Just a few things you forgot to mention in your disclosures. You might want to call your lawyer." He opened his mouth to argue, but I was already standing. "You can get this," I said, tapping the paper. "Or we can get everything. Your choice." As I walked out, I realized I wasn't shaking. I wasn't afraid. The cold air hit my face, and for once, it felt clean. A few days later, Elizabeth called me back to her office. "We found something big," she said the moment I sat down. She pushed a folder toward me. Inside were pages of transactions, transfers from David's dental practice to a personal account under his mother's name, every month for 3 years. "And look at this," Elizabeth said. A property deed for a downtown apartment he claimed was storage space. I flipped through the photos. The apartment was modern, fully furnished, and definitely not for storage. "So that's where they've been meeting," I murmured. Elizabeth nodded. "He's made it very easy for us. When this goes to mediation, we'll have him cornered." My head swam. There was anger, yes, but beneath it, something else. Relief. Proof that I hadn't imagined it, that I wasn't the crazy, ungrateful wife my family painted me to be. Elizabeth leaned forward. "You played by the rules, Sarah. He didn't. That's why we'll win." That night I drove home in silence, snow beginning to fall again. I parked outside the apartment building and sat there for a while, watching the flakes drift in the streetlight. Ellen must have seen the headlights because she appeared at my window, holding a thermos. "Hot chocolate," she said, handing it to me. "You look like you've got something to celebrate." "I do," I said, smiling faintly. "He's finally getting caught?" She laughed, that low, warm laugh of hers. "Good. About time karma did its job." I went upstairs and tucked the kids into bed. Lily asked if we could make snow angels tomorrow. "Sure," I said, kissing her forehead. "We'll make the biggest ones we can." And for the first time, the future didn't look like a storm I had to survive. It looked like open sky. But not everyone shared my relief. Word of the financial investigation spread faster than I expected. My mother called one evening while I was preparing lesson plans. Her voice was tight, brittle. "Sarah, must you make this public? People are starting to talk." I set down my pen. "Then maybe they should talk about what he did, not what I'm doing." "You're making a spectacle of yourself, dragging the family name through the mud." "Mom, he stole from me. He lied. Why are you more worried about his reputation than my life?" "You could handle this privately." "I tried that," I said. "You told me to stay quiet." My father took the phone then, his voice softer but not warmer. "We can't afford scandal, Sarah. Not with our friends, our business connections." "I can't afford silence." The line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, the dial tone humming like an old wound reopening. Then I laughed quietly, almost to myself. I'd been waiting my whole life for their approval, and now I realized how little it was worth. Later that night, I drove through downtown, past the glowing storefronts and decorated trees. The radio played "Let It Snow," cheerful and oblivious. I rolled down the window, let the cold air sting my face, and thought about how much had changed in a single year. I wasn't fighting just for money or justice anymore. I was fighting to be believed. The city lights blurred through the snow, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a woman left behind. I felt like someone finally catching up to her own strength. The mediation room smelled like old coffee and tension. I sat beside Elizabeth at the long oak table, the kind meant to make people feel small. Across from us, David straightened his tie, all smug composure and false confidence. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, and he nodded, smirking at me like this was just another performance he was certain he'd win. Elizabeth didn't bother with small talk. She slid a thick folder onto the table with a quiet thud. "Before we begin," she said, her voice calm and sharp, "I'd like to enter new financial evidence into the record." David's smirk faltered. "What is this?" "Transparency," Elizabeth said. "Something you seem to have misplaced." She opened the folder and spread the pages out. Bank statements, wire transfers, property, deeds. "Here we have transfers from your business account to your mother's name, totaling $280,000. And here," she tapped another page, "payments to a non-existent consulting firm registered at your office assistant's home address." David's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "These accusations are unsubstantiated." "They're documented," Elizabeth cut in, "and if you'd like to debate authenticity, we can bring in the federal auditor who verified them." I watched David's hands tighten into fists, the color draining from his face as Elizabeth continued, methodical and relentless. "This so-called storage apartment downtown, fully furnished, registered as a business expense. Convenient, considering how often you were there after office hours." His voice cracked as he said, "That's not relevant to the financial settlement." "It's relevant to your credibility," Elizabeth replied smoothly. "And I think we both know you've exhausted your supply of that." The mediator cleared her throat, looking exhausted already. "Mr. Thompson, these are serious discrepancies. I recommend you take your counsel's advice before this escalates further. David leaned back, jaw tight. You're trying to humiliate me. No, I said softly. You did that yourself. He glared at me, but for once his words didn't land. He was unraveling, and everyone in the room could see it. Elizabeth closed her folder, satisfaction flickering briefly in her eyes. Now, she said, let's discuss settlement terms. The next hour felt surreal. Numbers bounced across the table like tennis balls. Alimony, property value, restitution. David kept insisting his practice was struggling, but every lie was followed by Elizabeth producing another piece of proof to the contrary. Finally, the mediator sighed. Given the evidence, I suggest an equitable split of assets, including compensation for hidden funds. David's lawyer leaned in to whisper to him again, but David didn't respond. He just stared down at the table, his arrogance finally deflated. When the papers were pushed toward him, he signed them without looking up. Elizabeth passed the final copy to me. Congratulations, she said quietly. You just bought your freedom. The words didn't hit right away. They sank in slowly, like warmth after frostbite. I glanced across the table. David's hands trembled as he gathered his things. He didn't even meet my eyes. The man who'd once controlled every detail of my life couldn't even control his pen. As we left the building, Elizabeth turned to me. You did well in there. Sometimes silence speaks loudest. Outside, the afternoon light bounced off the snow, almost too bright to look at. For the first time in months, the air felt breathable. I followed Elizabeth to her car. What now? I asked. She handed me a sealed envelope. Inside are your settlement details, accounts, investments, and enough for a substantial new start. What you do next is up to you. I hesitated, running my fingers over the envelope. What would you do? Elizabeth smiled, the kind of smile that hinted she'd survived her own wars. I'd build something beautiful out of what he tried to destroy. When I got home, Ellen was waiting with 2 cups of coffee and a grin. So, it's done? It's done, I said. She raised her mug. To justice. I laughed. To peace. Same thing sometimes. That night, after the kids went to bed, I opened the envelope. The figures inside didn't feel real. Accounts I'd never seen. Investments I didn't know existed. Elizabeth had uncovered everything David had tried to hide, and now it was mine. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, but not from fear. This wasn't revenge in the way my family imagined it. Loud and dramatic. It was quiet, methodical, dignified justice without apology. The next morning, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Sarah, she began, her voice taut. I heard about the court ruling. Word travels fast, I said. You didn't have to humiliate him in public. People are talking. Then maybe they should talk about what he did, not what I survived. You've made this so messy. You could have settled privately. He drained our accounts, Mom. He lied for years. Her sigh crackled through the line. You got your money? Isn't that enough? I laughed softly. It was never about the money. Then Michael's voice joined in. He was on speakerphone. Mom's right, Sarah. You've proven your point. Don't drag this out. Dignity is quiet. Maybe that's why none of you ever had any, I said before hanging up. I stared at the phone for a long time. The old me would have felt guilty, desperate to explain, to make them understand. But the woman who'd walked out of that courthouse didn't owe them justification. The world outside my window was blanketed in white. I sat at the kitchen table, papers spread around me like puzzle pieces of a new life. For the first time, possibility didn't scare me. It thrilled me. A week later, I met with a real estate agent Elizabeth recommended. Something peaceful, but with space for the kids, I told her. She showed me a catalog of houses, some modest, some extravagant. But one stopped me cold. A restored colonial mansion in Vale, sitting at the edge of a snow-covered valley. Its wide veranda was draped in pine garlands, and in the photo, a massive Christmas tree glowed gold in the living room window. "This one just went on the market," the agent said. "It's been fully renovated. You could move in by winter." I traced the edge of the picture with my finger. It didn't look like a house. It looked like redemption. That night, as the kids and I ate dinner, Lily asked, "Mommy, will we have a Christmas tree this year?" I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, and it's going to shine brighter than ever." After they went to bed, I sat alone in the quiet apartment, the Vale photo glowing on my laptop screen. Outside, the snow fell steady and slow, covering the streetlights in a golden haze. I thought of everything my family had said, how I'd ruined our reputation, how I should have stayed quiet. They'd cut me off to protect their image, but I was done shrinking to fit anyone's version of perfection. I folded the photo, slipped it into my wallet, and whispered to the empty room, "You wanted a perfect picture, Mom? Just wait. I'll show you what perfect looks like." The snow kept falling, and somewhere deep inside, I could feel the first spark of something dangerous and beautiful, an idea that glittered like gold under the Christmas lights. The drive to Vale felt like stepping into another world. The city faded behind me, replaced by pine trees blanketed in snow and winding mountain roads that shimmered in the morning sun. Lily and Noah sat in the back seat, pressed against the windows, pointing at deer tracks and frozen lakes as if they were seeing magic for the first time. Ellen rode shotgun, humming to an old Christmas tune on the radio, her thermos of coffee steaming in the cold air. When the house came into view, the world seemed to pause. It sat at the base of a slope, framed by evergreens dusted in white, its windows glowing with soft gold light. A wraparound porch, stone chimneys, dark wood doors. It looked like something out of a winter fairy tale. Lily gasped, "Mommy, it looks like a Christmas castle." I pulled over at the end of the long driveway, heart pounding in a way I hadn't felt since childhood. "It's ours," I said, barely above a whisper. For a second, I couldn't move. After everything, the humiliation, the sleepless nights, the lawyers, the loneliness, I was here, not surviving, beginning again. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and vanilla. The floors creaked under my boots as I walked through the foyer. High ceilings, a grand staircase, sunlight streaming through arched windows. The living room had a stone fireplace big enough to stand in, and the kitchen opened out into the woods through wide glass doors. Every corner felt warm, alive. Ellen ran her fingers along the banister and smiled. "You didn't just buy a house, honey. You bought back your peace." The kids raced upstairs, shouting over each other about which bedroom they wanted. I stood in the middle of the empty living room, listening to their laughter echo through the walls. For years, I'd lived in houses built for someone else's comfort. This one finally felt like mine. The next few days were a blur of unpacking and discovery. Each morning, sunlight poured through the windows like liquid gold, waking us gently. I brewed coffee while the kids fed birds on the back deck, their giggles carried on the wind. Ellen helped me hang curtains and pick out furniture. "You need a couch that makes people want to stay a while," she said, insisting we choose the softest one in the store. One afternoon, we found a small shop on Main Street selling Christmas trees. The owner, an older man with red cheeks and a thick wool coat, greeted us cheerfully. "That's a big one," he said as I pointed to the tallest spruce in the lot. "Big family?" I smiled. "Bigger than they think." He laughed, and for a moment, so did I. We hauled the tree back to the mansion in a borrowed truck. It took nearly an hour just to get it upright, its branches brushing the 12-foot ceiling. The scent of pine filled the air. Lily clapped her hands when we plugged in the first strand of lights. "It's taller than me and Noah together." "Then we'll need twice as many ornaments," I said. We spent the entire evening decorating. Noah hung his handmade snowflakes near the bottom, while Lily climbed the step stool to hang glass globes near the top. Ellen strung gold ribbon in spirals, her hands steady despite the arthritis she never mentioned. When the lights finally flicked on, the whole room glowed in shades of amber and gold. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The fire crackled softly, reflecting off the ornaments like tiny suns. I thought about every Christmas that had come before. Stiff smiles, polite conversations, my mother's perfect table settings, the constant feeling that I was performing for approval that never came. This was nothing like that. This was real. "It's perfect," Ellen whispered. I nodded. "It's ours." We baked gingerbread that night, the kids covered in flour and laughter. I played old carols on the speaker and Ellen joined in, her voice slightly off-key but full of warmth. When I tucked the kids into bed later, Lily asked, "Do you think Grandma will call this year?" I hesitated. "Maybe," I said softly. "But even if she doesn't, we have everything we need right here." Downstairs, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, watching the lights flicker on the tree. The glow painted the walls in gold and copper, making the house look alive, breathing. For the first time in years, I felt calm. Not the brittle calm of pretending, but the deep, quiet kind that comes from building something with your own hands. A few days later, an email appeared in my inbox, an invitation to the annual Thompson Family Charity Gala, the same event my parents had hosted every Christmas for as long as I could remember. My name wasn't on the mailing list anymore, of course. It was a forward from an old family friend, the kind of person who liked to gossip under the guise of concern. I stared at the invitation for a long time. The gala was always my mother's pride and joy, her annual chance to display our perfect family. I could picture it even now. The marble hall, the expensive dresses, the forced laughter. The thought of it made me smile. Not from longing, but from clarity. Ellen found me at the kitchen table, laptop open, coffee untouched. "Planning something?" she asked, a knowing spark in her eyes. "Just thinking," I said. "Dangerous word, that one," she teased. I closed the laptop and looked toward the glowing tree in the living room. "I think it's time I hosted a celebration of my own. Something real, for people who actually deserve it." She grinned. "Now that's the spirit." That night, the snow fell thicker, muffling every sound outside. I stood by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching flakes drift down through the golden light spilling from the living room. The house felt alive, humming with quiet anticipation, as if it knew what I was planning before I did. The next morning, I started making lists. Names, ideas, dishes, friends from work, neighbors, Ellen's church group, the barista who always slipped me extra cinnamon. I didn't know exactly what the dinner would look like yet, but I knew how it would feel. Warm, loud, joyful, the opposite of everything I'd left behind. A few nights later, after the kids had gone to bed, I went outside. The air was crisp and biting, the kind that made your breath sparkle in the cold. I stood on the porch, staring out at the valley. The moonlight caught the snow, turning the ground into a sheet of silver. Behind me, through the wide window, the Christmas tree shone so bright it looked like molten gold spilling into the darkness. I closed my eyes and took a long breath. "They cut me off to protect their perfect image," I whispered. "But I've built something real, and it shines brighter than their lies ever could." When I opened my eyes, a single snowflake landed on my glove, glittering for an instant before melting away. Inside, the tree glowed like a promise, gold against the white silence, calling out to the ghosts of my past. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet certainty began to form. This wasn't just the beginning of a new life. It was the start of something bigger, something they would never see coming. The idea came to me on a quiet December morning, the kind where the world feels still under a fresh layer of snow. I was drinking coffee at the kitchen table, flipping through local news online, when I saw a photo of my mother and father smiling beneath a crystal chandelier at their annual Christmas gala. The caption read, "The Thompsons host their traditional charity dinner. Guests praise the family's enduring grace." I almost laughed. Grace. That word had always been their favorite disguise. I looked up at the golden light reflecting off the tree in the corner of the room. My house felt alive, warm, messy, imperfect. And then it hit me. If they could have their perfect dinner, so could I. Only mine wouldn't be for show. Mine would be for people who actually deserved joy. I grabbed a notebook and a pen, started writing names. At first, it was just Ellen and a few coworkers from the art center. Then I thought of Rachel, my college roommate who had once cried to me about spending Christmas alone after her divorce. I added her name, then Emily's, another teacher who lived too far from her own family to visit. Before I knew it, my pen was racing down the page. I titled the list simply, Christmas Feast. The first call I made was to Rachel. When she answered, her voice sounded small. "Sarah, it's been ages." "I know," I said, "but I was wondering, what are you doing for Christmas?" She hesitated. "Probably takeout and a movie. The kids are with their dad this year." "How about Vale instead?" I asked. "A big dinner at my new place. Good food, too much wine. People who won't judge you for wearing pajamas after dessert." There was a pause, then a soft sniffle. "You mean that?" "I mean it." She laughed through tears. "Then I'm in. I'll bring pie." Next was Emily. She worked in the next town over and usually spent holidays volunteering because, as she put it, it's easier than being alone. When I told her about the feast, she didn't hesitate. "You mean Christmas in Vale with an actual tree and everything? I'm packing already." Ryan, the barista from the cafe near my art studio, was next. His family had stopped speaking to him after he came out last year, and I couldn't stand the thought of him spending the holidays pouring lattes for strangers. "Bring your boyfriend," I told him, "and come hungry." He laughed, his voice bright. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." "Then I'll make peppermint brownies. They're dangerously addictive." By noon, my kitchen table was covered in sticky notes and phone numbers. I called Mrs. Larson, the widow who lived 2 doors down. "Oh, I couldn't," she said at first. "I wouldn't want to intrude." "You wouldn't be intruding," I told her. "You'd be honoring us with your presence." There was a long pause before she said quietly, "You'd make my holiday, dear." By the end of the afternoon, I had 29 names. None of them shared my blood, but all of them shared something real. Kindness, courage, empathy. The kind of people who showed up when no one else did. Over the next week, my house turned into a small production set. I hired a caterer from Seattle, young, ambitious, and thrilled by the idea of hosting a grand feast in the mountains. We planned the menu: heritage turkey with truffle stuffing, maple-glazed ham, roasted vegetables with rosemary, lobster mac and cheese, and a dessert spread that looked like art. "Theme?" the caterer asked. "Golden evergreen," I said. "Something that feels alive. Something that says we made it." Ellen helped with the decorations, humming carols while she tied garlands along the staircase. The kids made handmade place cards shaped like stars, Emily, and Rachel arrived early to help polish silverware and fold napkins. The air buzzed with laughter and cinnamon and the soft hum of jazz music drifting from the speakers. One afternoon, as the caterers tested recipes in the kitchen, Ellen turned to me, hands on her hips. "You know what this feels like?" "What? Family?" I smiled, a lump rising in my throat. "Yeah, it does," she nodded. "You're building something special here, honey. Not everyone gets a second chance to do that." Later that night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in the living room, the only light coming from the fireplace and the tree. I opened a box of blank cards and started writing one for each guest. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for proving that kindness can be louder than blood. When I finished the last card, I lined them up along the mantel. My hands smelled of pine and ink, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was thriving. The next day, I finalized the music, a live jazz trio, soft and soulful. The florist from town delivered crates of white roses and pine branches. Ellen insisted on overseeing the table settings. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right," she said, arranging candles in golden holders. The house smelled of roasted garlic and sugar cookies, and outside, the snow kept falling, thick and silent. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window. The valley below glowed under the moonlight, the mountains towering like silent witnesses. For years, Christmas had meant smiling for photos I didn't want to take, serving food I didn't get to eat until everyone else was done. I remembered my mother's voice. "Keep your shoulders straight, Sarah. Guests are watching." Now, the only thing watching was the sky. I raised my glass to the reflection in the window. Me, standing in my own house, surrounded by light. "Here's to the people who stayed," I whispered, "and to the ones who never deserved to." The night before the feast, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the couch, looking at the tree shimmering in gold. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about creating something beautiful in the space where pain used to live. When the clock struck midnight, I went outside, barefoot in the snow, just to feel it burn against my skin. The mountains loomed, dark and still, and I felt small in the best way, like part of something vast and forgiving. Morning came, wrapped in silver light. I woke to the sound of trucks outside, the caterers arriving, unloading trays of food and polished serving platters. The jazz trio followed soon after, tuning instruments by the window. The house filled with the sound of laughter and clinking dishes, the smell of cinnamon and roast turkey. Lily tugged on my sleeve. "Mommy," she asked, "will Grandma come if she sees our pictures?" I knelt down and brushed a curl from her face. "Maybe," I said. "But this isn't about her anymore." She smiled and ran off to help Noah arrange ornaments on the banister. I stood in the middle of the house, surrounded by movement and joy, and for a moment, everything blurred. The sounds, the lights, the laughter. I realized that what I'd built here wasn't just a party. It was proof. Proof that family could be chosen, that love could rebuild what pride had destroyed. A photographer I'd hired for the night arrived early, setting up his equipment. "You want it to look candid or formal?" he asked. "Neither," I said. "Just real." He nodded. "Real's easy. You just have to stop posing." The music swelled, the doorbell rang, and the first guests began to arrive, their cheeks pink from the cold, arms full of wine and gifts. The house filled with voices, warmth, and the kind of laughter that comes from people who've earned it. As I looked around the glowing room, the tree, the table, the people, I felt something deep in my chest loosen. Tomorrow, I'd post the photos, and maybe my family would see. Maybe they'd call. But tonight wasn't about them. It was about this moment, this house, this light that couldn't be faked. And for the first time, I was exactly where I was meant to be. By Christmas Eve, the house felt alive. Snow drifted down in soft sheets outside, and every window glowed like it held a secret. The jazz trio tuned up near the fireplace, the low hum of the bass filling the air, while the caterers moved like clockwork in the kitchen. The smell of roasted turkey, maple-glazed ham, and cinnamon butter filled every corner. Lily and Noah ran down the stairs, their laughter echoing through the high ceilings as Ellen directed the staff with her usual no-nonsense warmth. I stood at the base of the staircase, adjusting a gold ribbon on the banister, and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. A green silk dress, hair loose, a smile that felt real. It had been a long time since I recognized the woman looking back. The first knock came just as the lights dimmed. Rachel stepped inside, shaking snow from her coat, a homemade pie cradled in her hands. "You weren't kidding about a big Christmas," she said, eyes wide at the sight of the tree glittering gold in the corner. "It's like walking into a dream." "Stay long enough, and you'll realize it's real," I said, taking her coat. Emily arrived next, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. "This house is ridiculous," she whispered, grinning, in the best possible way. One by one, the guests filled the mansion. Ryan and his boyfriend brought guitars, their faces flushed from the cold. Mrs. Larson appeared in her finest wool coat, holding a bottle of red wine wrapped in a silk scarf. "I haven't worn this dress in 20 years, she said shyly, and I hugged her tighter than I meant to. The room filled with music and chatter. Glasses clinked, laughter bloomed, and, for the first time, my house didn't feel too big. Every sound, every smile, every flash of light made it feel perfectly full. Dinner began just after 6. The table stretched across the dining room, candles flickering between garlands of pine and gold ornaments. The turkey gleamed under the chandelier, surrounded by sides that looked like something out of a food magazine. When everyone sat down, I took a deep breath, looked around the table, and realized this was what belonging looked like. Faces that glowed with warmth instead of judgment. "To Sarah," Ellen said, lifting her glass, "for reminding us that home isn't a place. It's the people who make you feel seen." Everyone cheered, glasses raised. I blinked hard, forcing back tears. "To second chances," I said, "and to all of you who made mine possible." As dinner went on, conversations spilled like wine. Rachel told stories about her twin boys and her new job at the library. Ryan made everyone laugh so hard they nearly cried, confessing how he burned his first batch of Christmas cookies trying to impress his boyfriend. Mrs. Larson shared tales from her youth about dances in Chicago ballrooms and how she met her husband under falling snow. Halfway through dessert, the jazz trio shifted to a slow, romantic tune. Ryan stood up with his guitar and began to sing, his voice smooth and rich. Lily ran to the center of the room, twirling in her red velvet dress. Noah followed, tripping over his own shoes, and the guests clapped in rhythm. Ellen, laughing, pulled Mrs. Larson to her feet, and soon the entire room was dancing. I stood by the fireplace for a moment, just watching. The firelight shimmered against the gold decorations, the tree glowing brighter than ever. It didn't feel like revenge, it felt like freedom. Then someone called out, "Sarah, come dance." I laughed. "I don't dance." "You do tonight," Emily said, grabbing my hand. So I did. I danced. I spun under the lights with my children, with Ellen, with laughter all around me. The photographer I'd hired caught every moment, Lily's curls flying as she spun, Ryan dipping his boyfriend dramatically, me laughing mid-step with my arms thrown wide. When the flash went off, I looked up and saw my reflection in the glass of the window, a woman surrounded by joy, standing exactly where she belonged. After dinner, when the music softened and the plates were cleared, everyone gathered near the fireplace with cups of cocoa and wine. The air hummed with peace, the kind that only comes when no one has to pretend. I caught Ellen watching me, her eyes bright. "What?" I asked, smiling. "Nothing," she said. "You just look home." That word hit me harder than I expected. I nodded. "Yeah, I think I finally am." When the last guests began to leave, snow was falling again, thick and silent. I stood on the porch, hugging each of them goodbye as their cars disappeared down the long drive. Mrs. Larson kissed my cheek. "You made this old lady's Christmas," she whispered. "You made mine," I said. Inside, the house was still glowing. Ellen helped gather the last of the glasses while the kids dozed on the couch under a blanket. I turned on the small lamp by the piano and sat down with my laptop. The photographer had already uploaded the photos, hundreds of them, glowing with color and warmth. Ellen leaned over my shoulder. "They're beautiful. You should share them. Let the world see what healing looks like." So I did. I selected a dozen and posted them online with a caption that came to me as easily as breath: "A Christmas for those who believed in second chances." For a moment, nothing happened. Then notifications began to light up the screen. Hearts, comments, messages. "You look radiant. What a beautiful home. This is what Christmas should feel like." Then one notification made me freeze. New message from Mom. Ellen noticed. "You going to read it?" "Not tonight," I said, closing the laptop. I stood and walked to the window. The night outside was calm, the valley below glowing faintly in the moonlight. Inside, the tree shimmered gold, its reflection flickering across the glass. I took a deep breath and whispered, "They cut me off to keep their image spotless, but sometimes the best revenge is letting your joy be seen." Ellen appeared beside me with 2 mugs of cocoa. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." "Merry Christmas," I said softly. "To all of us who finally made it home." She smiled and slipped an arm around my shoulder. Behind us, the fire burned low, the music faded, and the camera light blinked once more before turning off. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, steady, endless. The house glowed against the darkness, a single warm light in the cold. And standing there, wrapped in peace, I knew I'd done it. Not revenge by destruction, but by living beautifully, by choosing joy loud enough for the whole world to hear. The morning after Christmas felt like waking up inside a dream I didn't want to end. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater and the soft rustle of wrapping paper left on the floor. I could still smell cinnamon and roasted turkey in the air. Lily and Noah were sprawled on the living room rug, surrounded by toys and ribbons, while Ellen hummed to herself in the kitchen, making coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I stretched, sore from dancing, and smiled at the sight of them. The tree still glowed faintly in the early light, gold ornaments catching the sunrise. I reached for my phone to check the time and froze when I saw the screen. Notifications, hundreds of them. Likes, shares, messages, and tags. I blinked, half asleep, before realizing what I was looking at. My Christmas post. I hadn't meant for it to be anything special, just a few photos. The tree, the dinner table, the guests smiling, Ellen and the kids dancing by, the fire. The caption had been simple: "A Christmas for those who believed in second chances." But somehow it had taken on a life of its own. "Oh my God," I whispered. Ellen looked over, wiping her hands on a towel. "What?" "Apparently, we went viral." She laughed. "What did you do now, sweetheart?" "Nothing, I think. The internet just really likes golden Christmas trees." By noon, the post had been shared thousands of times. The local Vale paper picked it up under the headline, "A Single Mom's Christmas of Second Chances Melts Hearts." Comments poured in from strangers. "You gave me hope. This made me cry in the best way. Thank you for showing what real family looks like." I scrolled through them in disbelief. "I didn't post them for attention," I said quietly. But somehow, the world found my piece worth looking at. Ellen poured 2 mugs of coffee and set one in front of me. "People can smell authenticity, honey, and they're starving for it." The day passed in a blur of phone pings and laughter. Every time I refreshed the page, there were more messages: old friends from college, people from the art center, even strangers sending photos of their own trees with the hashtag #2ndChanceChristmas. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. Then, around 5, the texts started. The first came from a number I hadn't seen in months. "Michael Thompson. Nice house. Guess you've been busy." I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, "Mom, we need to talk." I put the phone face down on the counter. Ellen raised an eyebrow. "Trouble?" "Just the ghosts of Christmas past," I said. Unbeknownst to me, the same post that had filled my house with warmth was setting off small explosions elsewhere. Back in Seattle, my mother's phone was ringing nonstop. Her friends from church had seen the article and wanted details. "Is that your daughter's mansion?" I thought she was struggling. Margaret Thompson, queen of composure, smiled through tight lips and said, "She's managing." But the gossip spread faster than she could control it. My brother, Michael, was furious. "She's embarrassing us again," he told her, "making everything public." My father sat quietly at his desk, scrolling through the comments himself. One line in particular caught his eye. "I wish my parents had supported me like she supports her kids." He didn't say it aloud, but it lingered, sharp as glass. Meanwhile, my mother stared at the photos on her tablet, me in the emerald dress, smiling beside Lily and Noah, surrounded by people who looked genuinely happy. She zoomed in, her fingers trembling slightly. "This can't be real," she thought. "She doesn't live like this." But the golden tree, the feast, the faces, it was undeniable. That evening, my phone rang again. Michael's name flashed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hey," he said, his voice tight. "Mom's upset." "I'm not. Surprised. You could have at least told us you were planning some production." "She feels blindsided." "Blindsided?" I repeated. "You mean like how I felt when I was uninvited from Christmas dinner?" He sighed. "That's not the same." "You're right," I said. "This one had joy." There was silence. Then he muttered, "You really know how to make everything about you." Maybe because for once it was about me. I hung up before he could answer. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, a message from my sister-in-law, one of those carefully curated women who spoke only in half-truths and exclamation points. "We should catch up soon. Your photos looked amazing. So proud of you." I laughed out loud. "So proud," I repeated, rolling my eyes. "That's rich." But the call I knew was coming arrived just after sunset. My mother. I let it ring once before answering. "Sarah," she began, her voice sharp and trembling. "Do you have any idea what kind of chaos you've caused? My phone hasn't stopped ringing. People think we abandoned you." I looked out the window at the falling snow. "You did. You just didn't expect the world to notice." "Don't be cruel," she said. "We were trying to protect you. Protect the family's reputation." "And I was protecting my children," I said calmly. "Looks like one of us succeeded." There was a pause, long enough to hear her breathing. "You've changed," she said finally, almost like an accusation. "That's the point, Mom." When I hung up, I felt no anger, no satisfaction, just relief. the kind that comes when you finally stop expecting someone to see you clearly. That night, after the kids went to bed, I sat by the window with a blanket and a cup of tea. The valley below was silent, the world hushed under layers of snow. The lights from the town twinkled faintly in the distance. My phone buzzed again, but this time, the name on the screen made me laugh softly. An editor from Vale Living magazine. "Miss Thompson," the message read, "we'd love to feature your story in our upcoming issue on resilience. Are you available for an interview?" I took a sip of tea and set the phone down. Outside, the wind carried faint notes of laughter from somewhere down the hill. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to be invisible, trying to fit into the quiet boxes my family built for me. And now, here I was. Visible. Loud in the best way. My happiness impossible to ignore. The next morning, I woke to find the article had been shared by the magazine's official page. Vale Woman's story of rebuilding family after betrayal inspires thousands. My inbox was flooded again. Messages from people telling me how my story made them feel seen, people who had been cut off, dismissed, silenced. Ellen handed me coffee and said, "You realize you've become a symbol, right?" I laughed. "A symbol of what?" "Of surviving, beautifully." I looked around the living room, the messy pile of wrapping paper, the half-empty mugs, the golden tree still shining. I smiled. "I'll take that." That evening, as twilight settled, I stepped outside. The snow was falling again, slow and quiet. The house glowed behind me, light spilling from every window. My phone buzzed one last time, another interview request. But I ignored it. I didn't need validation anymore. I whispered to the night. They built their image on perfection. I built mine on truth. Turns out, truth photographs better. Inside, Lily and Noah's laughter drifted through the walls, the sweetest sound in the world. I closed the door, letting the warmth wrap around me. The storm outside was theirs now. Mine was the light that stayed. It started with the flowers, a white box on the doorstep, wrapped in gold ribbon, the kind you only see in catalogs. The card was signed, "Thinking of you, Margaret." No message, no apology, just her name, neat and proud, like nothing had happened. I stared at it for a long time before bringing it inside. Ellen spotted it first. "Well," she said, setting down her mug, "looks like the ghosts are trying to get back into the house." I laughed, but my chest tightened. They must have heard the living are doing fine without them. For a few days it continued. Flowers, handwritten notes, missed calls from my brother. Someone even mailed a tin of cookies with my mother's handwriting on the tag. Every attempt felt rehearsed, like a PR campaign. Then, one afternoon, the inevitable happened. The doorbell rang, and when I opened it, there stood Michael, my older brother, holding a box of pastries and a look that didn't quite fit his face. "You've really outdone yourself, Sarah," he said, stepping inside without waiting. "This place is impressive." "Thanks," I said. "It's nice to finally have room for people who actually want to visit." He ignored that. "Mom's been miserable. She misses you. You should visit." "It's time for what?" "For forgiveness?" he said simply, like it was a favor I owed. I walked to the counter, poured 2 cups of coffee, and handed him one. "She missed me when she had a full table and still left 2 chairs empty," I said quietly. Michael sighed. "You know how she is. She panics about appearances. It wasn't personal." "Not personal?" I repeated. "You mean when she uninvited her own daughter from Christmas because my divorce was inconvenient?" He shifted uncomfortably. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said, voice steady. "I'm being specific." He smiled weakly, the way people do when they realize the script isn't working. "You've changed," he said finally. I had to. Staying the same wasn't working. He left the pastries on the counter and mumbled something about seeing me soon. When the door closed behind him, the silence felt heavier than before. I didn't open the box. 3 days later, it happened again. This time, it wasn't a note or a call. It was the sound of tires crunching against snow and a car door slamming outside. Through the window, I saw her, my mother, wrapped in a fur coat. Her hair perfect, her expression unreadable. Ellen appeared behind me, drying her hands on a towel. Want me to handle this one? No, I said. I think it's my turn. When I opened the door, the cold rushed in. She stood there, holding a small gift bag. I didn't come to argue, she said quickly. I didn't say you did. May I come in? I hesitated for a moment. I considered saying no, but I stepped aside. 5 minutes, I said. She walked in like someone entering a museum, careful not to touch anything. Her eyes swept the room, the fireplace, the photographs on the mantel, the golden tree still glowing softly in the corner. This is lovely, she said finally. You always had taste. Maybe you got that from me. I smiled faintly. Maybe. Everyone's talking about you, Sarah. You're quite the success story. You mean the story where I survived your silence? Her face stiffened. That's not fair. No, I said softly. But it's true. She set the gift bag down on the table. I just want my family back, she said, voice trembling. I've missed you. I've missed the children. I looked at her carefully. No, I said. You want your reputation back. She flinched, as if I'd slapped her. You think that's all this is? I think you're used to control, and I think losing it feels a lot like losing love to you. She looked away, blinking hard. You don't understand how hard it's been for me, hearing what people say. Mom, I interrupted. I know fear. I lived in it for years. But you used fear as an excuse for cruelty. You could have chosen compassion. You didn't. Her voice cracked. I made mistakes. You made decisions, I said. Mistakes can be forgiven. Decisions have consequences. She looked smaller then, her posture softening, shoulders drooping under the weight of her coat. I'm sorry, she said, almost whispering. I forgive you, I said, and her face lit up for a fraction of a second before I added, but forgiveness doesn't mean you get to come inside. Her smile froze. What? This house isn't built on guilt. You don't get to use regret as a ticket in. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of wind outside filled the space between us. Then she nodded slowly, her chin trembling. You've become very cold. No, I said quietly. I've become clear. I opened the door. The wind howled through, lifting her hair. She hesitated, staring at me like she was searching for the little girl who used to chase her approval. But that girl was gone. She stepped outside. You'll regret this one day. I smiled. You already did. Then I closed the door. I stood there, hands shaking, not from sadness but from release. For years I had imagined this conversation ending with her hugging me, apologizing, finally saying the words I'd needed to hear. But standing there in the quiet, I realized I didn't.